Hey everybody, welcome back to Cults to Consciousness. My name is Shalise Ansola, and today we are diving more into vampirism. So we just did an interview with her. It was very successful. Everyone had a lot of nice things to say. So many kind words. We love our community for that reason. Thanks for joining us again, Rachel Clinesmith.
Hi.
Yeah, so good to have you back. Everyone was raving over your makeup, I just have to say. And part of your story, a huge part of your story, is how you started cosmetic lines, one of them for the cult leader we are going to be talking about. And as you mentioned off screen and on camera, I think in your interview, he is a self-proclaimed cult leader of the Vampyres. So, okay, I think just to start off, I just have to, in case no one has seen or in case some people haven't seen your first interview, explain to us what a vampire is in the terms of how you were involved.
Sure. So in regards to living vampires or people who could be called real vampires, there's a few different kinds. There's vampires with a Y, which is usually the vampire community that considers themselves to be either sanguine or psychic vampires. And sanguine vampires actually do consume human blood, hopefully consensually. And then, psychic vampires, they consume human energy. Again, hopefully consensually is the idea behind it. But and then you have lifestyle vampires, which is a lot more of people who are involved with Sabretooth and, the events Endless Night that aren't part of the inner circle are just lifestylers. It's kind of some sect of goth, kind of, where they just get up, they wear the fangs, dress like vampires, and go out to these clubs, these balls, and it's more for fun. And I guess people put LARPing in the lifestyle vampires as well, because people have the LARP for like Vampire the Masquerade and stuff, but not everyone considers those to be the same thing, although many people do.
Mm-hmm. So you ended up into the community. You were initially attracted to the goth community, moved to LA, got kind of involved in the vampire community, was introduced to Father Sebastian, is what he calls himself. And he was kind of the face of this vampire scene in LA and actually around the world in different places. And he starts this religion, on paper even, of the vampires. And he has all these rituals and things that he's doing. I want to make it clear that when we're talking about these rituals and occult things, we're not saying that don't practice any type of rituals or occult things. What we're saying is do it in a way that doesn't harm other people or make sure everyone is aware and consensual with these rituals. So we're talking about the ways in which this man basically would do these rituals in a negative way that was manipulative, coercive, and harmful. Had to just put that out there. Do you have anything to add about that, Rachel?
Sure. I mean, that's generally part of, a lot of cults. There's certain things like, controlling people wear, controlling people eat, controlling, who people associate with. And religion is just one more layer of that. It's, kind of control over your psyche, of your spirituality, of your relationship with, life itself in this capacity. And that's what he was really trying to do is he latched onto this vampire thing as a way to create a legacy for himself. That's why he named in Legacy Ox, because he's obsessed with immortality, obviously, like wanting to create something that's going to outlive him. Well, what's going to outlive him, unfortunately, a lot of bad memories for a lot of people, that's what people are remembering. Every time I talk about this, I get so many messages and comments from people who he's victimized, who are scared to speak out, unfortunately, a lot of them, or who have been threatening to silence. But it's crazy. I never believed. I mean, I knew a lot what happened after I started asking questions and talking, people, but I never realized how deep and how far it went.
Yeah. And you know what's so interesting that I think we need to bring up? Out of all of the interviews and guests we have scheduled to come on the show, which is a very brave thing to do, it's hard to go public. Absolutely. It's a huge deal. I want to say this is the first time that we've had this many people scheduled that all canceled continuing to talk about this topic. So because they were afraid to speak out, because they didn't want the publicity, because they didn't want the backlash. And we've talked to so many different people from so many different backgrounds. So I think it really speaks volumes and adds a lot of weight to this conversation when people understand that they are being scared into silence. So with this man, Father Sebastian, he is a fangsmith. That's kind of how he started, right? And started collecting all these people and essentially manipulating and using women to do his bidding, free labor. We talked in your interview about how you knew of some women who were assaulted by him. And so this is a man who is operating at the top of this pyramid, this narcissistic pyramid, and using and grooming people. So today we wanted to talk more about the ritualistic side, the things that he actually wanted his followers to do, things that he was claiming to do. And guys, if you're listening and you're joining us live, thanks so much for being here. Drop those questions in the comments. Jonathan will be starring them, bringing them up as we go. I hope survivors stay strong and find a community to heal. Fear is a huge tool used by manipulators. I hope other survivors know they are strong and worthwhile. Yes, thank you so much for saying that. So drop your questions in the comments. We're going to do a shorter live today, just so you guys are aware. Okay, so I'm going to give you the floor, Rachel, to talk about the different ways that these rituals would come about, kind of how they happen and what they looked like.
Sure. I think the ritual components are honestly one of the more insidious parts of what he does, because it's not out there to the public. Like, it's not, he's not advertising we're doing rituals behind closed doors at this party. It's not all over his Facebook or whatever platforms he's using at the time. He's talking about the balls and it's a blade party or whatever, whatever he's trying to copy at the moment. Someone mentioned maybe the vampire, and I don't think people, even when they first are exposed to it, they really realize what's happening. And I think that's part of the problem. Is some people do, yes, they're going there for that reason. But every single ball he has, every single event he does, whether it's a smaller event or a whole huge vampire ball, there is some ritual component to it that he's incorporated into his belief system, his religion, the books he's written about it. And everyone who attends these events is unknowingly participating in these rituals based on what they believe in anyway, what they're trying to accomplish by harvesting the energy of everyone who's present, basically.
Yeah, so what does that actually look like? How does he go about doing that or saying he's doing that?
I mean, it varies. I mean, he'll host private seances at the VIP only events, where they basically try and call in anyone or anything for that matter, and then also, invoke the egregore he created, I mentioned before, Elleroth. They also just at the smaller events, they'll have everyone who is like of the inner circle come together and they'll stand around and hold hands, and he'll ask us to pass energy between ourselves, and around the group to kind of, create energy for whatever purpose he's asking for at the moment, usually successful ball, whatever's, preparing for at the time. Usually, his own endeavors and his own businesses. There's often naked women involved, like one of his, he calls them either muses or his exes. He'll have like naked in the middle of a table with ritual items, placed on her, or even food at certain points. Different people he has come in and perform these rituals. Some of them are, priests he's initiated or priestesses he's initiated himself and trained and taught in this thing he's created. Others are just people who are part of the paranormal or witchcraft community in wherever city he's in.
Okay, so is there chanting involved? Is he reading off a script? Like what?
There is some chanting involved. It depends on what was happening. They do have a howl thing they do.
What's that look like?
Everyone comes together and they howl. It's just, it feels very campy, but it's also used by like, sports teams, that kind of thing. You get together and everyone in a group and say something or do something, and it's another way to channel that energy into one spot, I guess.
Okay. So what are the ways, because we had mentioned that, or you had mentioned to me that he uses these rituals to manipulate or control people.
Well, he's created this very layered society. So he considers anyone who purchases fangs from him, which, I mean, let's be fair, most people who go buy his fangs are doing it for a party. They're doing it for Halloween, they're to dress up. To them, it's camp. And his most successful event financially has always been New Orleans. And I will say the majority of guests in New Orleans at Endless Night have always been tourists, regular people. They're not part of the vampire community. Then you go to places like New York, Vegas, LA, or even like places in Europe, and you'll find that a lot of attendees are part of the goth community, part of the vampire community, and there's just not there is quite a few, but not enough for him to make the kind of money he does when it's, being marketed to people who are outside of it. But what he does is he hosts these series of events. He tries to ingratiate himself with whatever local celebrities he can, which now being in Hollywood, there's a lot around. I unfortunately, before I knew what was happening, brought on several of them to work with him, before I realized. And I was like babysitting him the entire time, trying to keep him from harassing them. Like I remember, so he did fangs for one of them for a photo shoot we did for the magazine cover. I mean, there's only been a couple of those that have celebrities y'all can figure it out. It's Vampyre magazine, right? But he literally was running around creepily talking about how he put his hands in her mouth, like afterwards. Like my hands were in
Ugh.
mouth, and he's just says disgusting things like, call me fang daddy like he did to me. He'll make jokes like that when he's doing it. And of course, like when you get fangs from him, he makes you do a little ritual. He makes you pick a vampire name out of a book, and he makes you like stand up and like raise your hand, like raise your right hand, and starts it off by the power of Sebastian. Like it's a whole thing. Like you have to like do that to get the fangs.
Okay. So in a very real way, who does he think he is?
um yeah. I mean, like he said, he calls himself a cult leader. He thinks he's a celebrity. I mean, I'm sure in certain circles he definitely is, but I don't know that he's as big as he thinks he is. The problem is in the spheres of influence that he has it. And so what I'm saying is like, so he has these beautiful elaborate parties where celebrities come. Like I was there and he kind of threw me to the wolves. Last minute, no supplies, no pay, asked me to do Guillermo from Wait in the Shadows, his makeup and hair,
Uh-huh.
like the day before he was supposed to be the MC for the ball. Asked me to do that and I agreed because okay, but like it was a whole mess. He's not equipped to handle the things he tries to handle, but he gets involved with these kinds of things. And so people will try to get closer. And the problem is the closer you get, the more he tries to exploit people. And I've even actually talked to people who, on my way out, he was starting to pull in closer. And they would say things to me like, he's asking me to do this, this, and this. And I'm like, that's what he's doing, because he's going to ask you for favors, small ones at first, to see how much you're willing to do. And then
Mm-hmm.
as time goes on, suddenly, you're working for him for very little pay, if anything at all. Like, and suddenly,
Yeah.
you're convinced that he's your friend, or for some people, he tries to become a father figure for, especially for young girls, which is really, really unfortunate.
Yeah.
That's the Father Sebastian name. And so suddenly, you're wrapped up in this, and it's happened so slowly that you don't realize it is happening until it's there, until suddenly the,
Yeah.
the switch flips and he's, suddenly being, Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Like it's like, it completely switches how he treats you, just like most narcissists do. And that's the problem, is that, yeah, he's a narcissist. Yeah, this is a pattern that we've seen on a smaller scale. Most of us have. A lot of us have been victims of that kind of abuse, right? But this isn't one person or one man abusing one woman at a time. It's an entire network that he's managed to build up to protect himself. So yeah, while narcissists will do like the whole flying monkeys thing, the smear campaign after you walk away, he's got a lot more of those flying monkeys than most do. And I think that's the
Mm.
main reason why people don't talk about it. And I've heard many stories of why people don't, like people who have been harassed, lost their jobs, lost their work, had their friends with their backs on them. Like it's crazy. It really is.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be that way. But there's really been no one to hold him accountable in any kind of real way. And that's why I
Mm-hmm.
decided to speak out in the first place, is because I know that more people will be sucked in the way I was, because it was super, super slow for me. I'm very autistic, like I said before, and I didn't even realize it. I thought we were just friends. I thought it was just, for fun initially. And then it becomes very serious very fast.
Right. And something that I wanted to talk about, the comments on your video, I was very impressed by people who are in the goth community or the vampire community who all came to rally around you and didn't once say, well, she's just making it up. The community's great. A lot of people are like, yeah, I wondered about that guy. He seemed a little off, or I'm so glad that she's talking about this. And so I just wanted to put that out about the character of the people who are in the goth scene, how it's so great that they all came to support you. So, before we get more into the secret rituals and why you didn't necessarily get too deep into them, I wanted to see if we have any questions from our listeners today. Lissa, welcome back, Lissa. She says, glad to see Rachel back. She has much more to her story. Thank you so much, Lissa. We appreciate that. Any questions here? Brooke says, I'm autistic and I'm impressed with how much networking for businesses and communication with other victims you did. Can you talk about how autism intersected with building relationships with victims?
Sure. So actually, yeah, that's actually very specifically how I handled it. My ex-husband made a joke around the time period when I began figuring this out of, be careful because Rachel will unionize all the women in your life against you. And that's essentially what I did. And so I had become very close to a lot of the women in the Sabretooth clan who were very, very close to Sebastian because I had learned from working in Hollywood and I didn't know when I was first doing this that I was masking. I didn't quite understand. I was just trying to play by the rules and, get ahead and, be successful out there and make friends and all that. I learned, during pandemic when I began unmasking, that's what I was doing. But I really tried to make friends and I can't do that fake. I can't fake making a friend with somebody. I don't have that capacity and I also don't understand hierarchy. And so because of that, I have no qualms about getting close to people. And so I had gotten very close to a number of the women who were close to him because I realized that when I did that, he couldn't really do anything to me at that point. I had been warned about a lot of things about him, but a lot of them seemed untrue. And the ones that did seem true were more about like not paying people, stuff like that at the time. I didn't really have the full context, especially since he does things like he'll ask the women around him to vouch for him specifically, like in plain English. He'll be like, oh, I've been accused of rape. I've been accused of this. And he'll be like, can you please write a letter on my behalf saying I'm not that kind of person? And people do it.
Wow.
People done it for real. I didn't do it, but he did ask me. And so when I began figuring this out, I would one-on-one go to these women and basically let them talk to me. Like I would basically start to kind of like drop little hints as best I can. I'm not good at hinting. That, what I was going through and see how open they were. And I found that very quickly that most people really were unhappy with their proximity to him. Most of these women he calls best friends, and they very publicly are, a lot of them are older too. Unfortunately, a lot of them are older women that they maybe don't have quite the capacity that we now have, and not quite the awareness, information, language that we have now in this generation, millennials and younger.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that they even like they're not happy. They know he's a bad person, but they still feel like some kind of loyalty to him. But a lot of them will talk freely and they'll warn people about him when they can. And so the more I did that, the more I realized that there was a different MO he had with everybody. And a lot of us were doing the same thing, playing the same roles, babysitting him. Like I mentioned the celebrities before, I was like running around behind him, trying to keep him from saying something off the wall. And I was just like, oh, well, he just says things to be provocative. He's just saying things to get a rise. He's not serious. He doesn't mean it. He did mean it. But at the time, I felt like if I babysitted him, which I've heard more than one woman say, I thought I could mitigate the damage he was causing.
Mm-hmm.
And most women who were involved with him thought they were making him a better person because he'd really make them believe that. He'd make them go to them and, oh, you're a strong, independent woman. I want to learn from you. Teach me how to be a better person. How a lot of men do. The emotional labor. And then he would really convince them. He really convinced me for a very brief time, that he was doing that, I was listening to me and he was changing his behavior. But the problem is he would take what he learned from one woman and use it on the next one. And it was a whole big circle of this where we're basically doing emotional labor for each other. And he's like pretending like it's his idea. And so I began talking to people, almost methodically and, carefully. I didn't want him to know I was leaving before I felt I was safe. Like I literally felt like I had to move across the country back home to New Orleans before I felt I was safe. And ironically, even though I'd done that, the very day after I sent that email saying I was done, he shows up in my town. He flew across the country to New Orleans. And yeah, I called those very same women and I made it very clear that he's not welcome to come to my house and try anything. That, I do have protection and I will defend my household and my kids because I was terrified. I'm like, are you serious? Out of nowhere, not a planned trip, flew to New Orleans the next day after I said I was done. And I made it very clear, like, y'all need to tell him I'm not the one. Don't do this right now. Because I will defend myself. I'm not gonna have an altercation in person. We're not doing it. Because previously
Yeah.
he's done that before where he'll like try and get you in person, like to have an altercation instead of on the phone or, over writing, never in writing, nothing ever in writing.
Never.
Never.
Right. Oh
But
my
yeah, so I
gosh.
mean, I called those same women who knew I was leaving before I did, and they, basically helped me to avoid him while he was in town. And I think that he intended to have an altercation, but he didn't. And so I'm very glad for that. I went to the place I was working at the time, and I'm like, this is happening, and they were like, well, he's not allowed in here. Call the cops if he shows up. Like. So I mean, that was good.
Yeah.
I did have that support because even though there's a lot of them are still there, some of them left. A lot of them left with me. A lot of them who were just starting to get close also turned around and didn't get sucked in, which is a
Mm-hmm.
really good thing. But several of them left the same time I did, and then several of them are still there, and they're still quote unquote friends with him. And unfortunately, they're still in it, but they do at least understand because they'll warn younger women away from him when they start asking
Mm-hmm.
questions like that.
Yeah. The thing that irks me the most, because I've seen it firsthand, when narcissists, when you get stuck around a narcissist, even if people warn you, the narcissist has a way of either discrediting the person who warned you, or like you're saying, oh, but I just need you to help me change. I'm trying so hard. Poor me. Here's my sob story. And then you start, like you said, you start to make excuses, or you didn't, but other people will make excuses for them, like, oh, he's trying to change. He's doing his best, because they
Oh
get
no, I did.
ahead.
I
They get
did. I
ahead of it.
absolutely,
You
I
did?
absolutely made excuses for him. No, 100%.
So
Just
hard.
just like in an abusive relationship, because I did. I believed him for a long time. It wasn't
Yeah.
until I started really seeing it and really asking around and finding out what the truth was that I started being able to see through it. But he sold it. And he'll get ahead of it too. He'll go and he'll be like, I just want you to know that this is being said about me. And I just want
Yes.
to answer any questions
Yes.
for you, any concerns. I've got people who will vouch for me. Like he's on top of it, which is a
Yes.
problem. But like he knows.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, as you mentioned, people didn't want to speak out because they didn't want to give them extra attention, or which is true for some people in his group, because it's not just him. Um, there are other people under him who kind of like use that protection to victimize people as well, which is
Yeah.
unfortunate. But him himself, every single time someone spoke out against him while I knew him, he freaked out. He would panic. He would rail. He'd go freaking nuts. He'd lose his mind.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't matter if they had any credibility or not, because unfortunately, like there's some people who tried to like speak out about him, but they also weren't great people. Other fangsmiths, other communities of vampires. If
Uh-huh.
not hard to find if you know what I'm talking about. But and they didn't have a lot of credibility because they were, just a competitor or whatever. But every single time it drove him crazy. Like he did everything he could to make it stop. Like he would try and send threatening letters, threatening emails, send his people after them. And I watched it happen beforehand. And even when I started to like try and leave, he, like I said, threatened me, threatened to cut
Yeah.
off, turn everyone against me, threatened to lie about me publicly, threatened all kinds of stuff. And he does. He freaks out. He's not the kind of person who any attention is good attention. No, he wants to be a god. Like he wants to be like super important and powerful. Like, and so anyone who says
Yeah.
otherwise is a threat to that. And that's what he wants to stop.
Mm-hmm. Oh, man, narcissist. Okay. Any other questions? Let's see. Molly, thank you so much for the super chat. Bravo, you are an inspiration to many. I agree. Thank you so much, Molly. Any questions? Another super chat. Thank you for speaking out on this. Thank you so much for that. We appreciate you. And can you speak to the red flags, asked Sarah, about how he evokes sympathy for women to protect him?
Ooh. Let me think. There's so many. I often make the joke. I thought it was a circus. Not. I saw so many red flags. Thought it was a circus. No, I mean being autistic made it really hard to see until after the fact. Now that I am looking back, I see everything so clearly. But at the time, I really didn't, and I really only started to see it when the red flags started showing up for me in a very, very clear way. which should have been a lot sooner, honestly, was when he started doing things like there was another woman who was associated with him who he claimed didn't like me, and he tried to put us in competition at all points in time, but I didn't want that. It wasn't my problem, and I really wasn't 100% convinced because of how he did it that it was her problem either, and I'm still not convinced.
Right.
I'm still not convinced it's not just him fabricating this entire thing to try and, create friction and problems and, as they do, pitting women against each other, but he would say certain things while doing that. First of all, he'd bring up my mistakes. He'd bring up things that he did to help me, and then try to throw it in my face, which obviously isn't good. That's obviously like an abusive red flag. And he would, try to use that in the middle of an argument that's completely unrelated. Just switch into that mode. And that's when I started seeing it as like, this feels like an abusive relationship. Like, even though I was just working with him and we were just like friends, like it started feeling that way when he did those kinds of things. And so, and there was one time specifically, about this woman, where he was trying to say, well, I can't pick you over her, but I have to pick you over her because you make me more money. Which he said those words exactly, like, for real. But I don't want to, because if I pick you over her, she's gonna me to me. And I said, well, what did you do? I said, well, what did you do that would make her do that? And he began screaming at me. I think I met, and of course, another, obvious, very, very giant red flag at that point. There's the yelling, the accusations, the
Yeah.
turning about, like all of it. But I don't know. It just happened. It happened over a matter of years. That's the thing.
Yeah. That's the thing with
He calls
cults,
them that.
it's
He calls
boiling
them
the
cult.
frog.
He calls them rituals. He calls it a cult. So I mean,
Yeah. So something that you had mentioned before we started was that the rituals, and you kind of talked about it here, were very secret. He's not publicizing these. It's an inner circle thing, and that's very common among high control groups and cults. They're not publicizing the weird stuff. You only get to it once you're super deep
right.
in, and then you don't
And
question it because you're already there.
and he makes it invite only. So he makes it
Yeah.
sound like it's VIP. It's important. You get extra access to like the parties, the events, the celebrities, whatever. Like it's that kind of secrecy. It's not just like, oh, we're not telling people because it's weird and creepy. He tries to make it cool. Like
Exclusive.
it's exclusive. It's like you're an important person.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So what goes on at those? Because you mentioned that you were uncomfortable with it and didn't want to participate.
I mean, I honestly walked out of a couple of them.
Mm.
So I mean, it felt extremely dark at some of them. Um, Specifically some of the ones he had Kadrick Olson lead. He's a well-known, occultist. And I don't know. I remember literally I one was during COVID when we had the live like the live parties like we're doing now, but it was like a ball, but like, on virtual. I literally turned off my computer because I don't care if it's over a screen or over in person, like energy transfers, energy travels, like, and like I said before, like I being from New Orleans, even though I wasn't, living here anymore, and I didn't have the language and knowledge I have now to understand why I was uncomfortable in those situations. I knew they were appropriative. I knew he was doing chaos magic. So I knew he was stealing from different, different types of practices, and then, using them without any, proper relationship building, without any proper reverence for, the ancestry, or for closed practices like voodoo. He tried to use voodoo a lot. He even created his own quote unquote Loa as the mascot for the balls, named him Fred Samedi, and claimed the story about this mascot he created was a little boy he saw busking in the French Quarter after Katrina. Like it was very exploitative. And even when I couldn't tell what he was doing personally was bad, some of the ritual stuff felt bad. So I mean,
Yeah. Can you describe what that would look like, or the setting, or what made you uncomfortable?
Obviously it's very dark. Obviously, it's usually happening at the VIP events, which are very invite only or very expensive to get into. Like he'll charge $1,000 for some of these things. People will pay it, certain people, certain number of people from around the world do it. And so people are, walking around in lingerie, so you have a naked woman. Those are the more private ones. Like when there's a naked woman involved, like I did describe some of that. Like some of the more like seances, they're private. Like the only ones that are super public are like the energy transfer ones, like where they're just kind of like standing around in a circle. It's, hey, Lil off, let's, call the corners, whatever. And honest to God, like, so he has Patty Negri still working for him. I worked for her for a while, and she literally uses the Beetlejuice seance words in her
Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice,
seances.
Beetlejuice?
No, like, so in the original movie, like when then they do the seance when it's ortho and he's like doing the seance and he's like, and the dead come alive and like, whatever that, but the whole
Yeah.
campy spiel, like that's her spiel. That's like she uses the literal Beetlejuice parts of it. Like, so I mean, if you want
Oh.
an example of that, they will do things like that. I mean, he also has been caught, I don't know how many times, plagiarizing. So he'll admit openly that his Strigoi, which is his um religion that he created,
Mm-hmm.
he's got the different black veils, red veils, which are basically codes of conduct for vampires. Like he's got every single event has a dress code. He tries to encourage people to eat certain things. Like he uses oysters in a very obnoxious way, like at events and like, because they're supposed to be an aphrodisiac and whatever. And the fact that they are like eating oysters in the raw, which are apparently still alive. I didn't know that until I was like with them doing this, and I learned that those are still living. It's why they're on the raw. It's why they're on ice, and I can't do it now. But they wanted to like consume their life force. I
Oh.
shouldn't be laughing, but it's an oyster. I mean, I prefer them. Oysters, Rockefeller, charbroiled. I'm from New Orleans. I don't do the raw thing anymore. But
Yeah.
it's the food is control, it's the clothing control, it's the dress codes for every event. It's things like that. But he will admit openly, as I was starting to say, that Strigoi he stole from Temple of the Vampire, which is like an earlier from like I think the 70s. Don't quote me on that. And they basically created this kind of occultist methodology around vampirism as a lifestyle and a religion. And they ripped off Crowley, who obviously ripped off John Dee. So I mean, it's just it's a pattern in the occult side, but he'll admit openly he took from TOV, and he'll even share them with people. Like he sent me the whole documents like from TOV when pushed and asked about it. But he's like, yeah, I had permission. Okay, sure you did. You had permission from Michelle Ballinger too, out of coercion. Or
All
there was one
right.
time, this is real funny actually. Well, kind of. So I used to have an apartment in Santa Monica many, many years ago, it's like 2018. And I had my friend Bill Piotrowski over from Nox Arcana and a bunch of people from the vampire community and Sebastian and Patty. And literally, he's like in the middle of talking about some holiday that was in one of the original books. I think it was the Sangonomicon. Don't quote me on that. I didn't read the earlier books. And it was some made up holiday that he'd put into the book. And Bill, on the spot, called him out on it. That was actually a made up holiday that his dad wrote in something for Joseph Vargo. He made it up. Like literally his dad had made that up, and then it got published by I think Joe and Michelle. And then
What?
Sebastian took from it and never even realized who he was stealing from, but he obviously plagiarized it, which he's been accused of plagiarism a lot too. I mean, among many other things, obviously. But the look on his face, I will remember for the rest of my life. I'm sorry, like
Oh
it
my
kind of
gosh.
broke him. And of course, Bill's like, I don't care. My dad doesn't care. He thought it was funny. Like he made this up. It's not a real holiday. Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh
that
my
was
gosh,
that was
that's so
interesting.
funny.
That was
Well,
interesting.
he also claims to be some sort of prophet, right? Like a
Yeah.
divine being of sorts.
So back before I really knew him very well or got, super involved, I had my first magazine, Crazy, I don't know if I can curse, but Crazy Bee
Sure.
magazine. And so I had interviewed him and I did a whole video interview of him because I still do usually when I do videos and I, transcribe them for print. But in this video, he was just in the process of moving to LA from New York City. I think he'd gone to Paris for years between that. And he went on this very long, and I'm sure I could send it to you. I'm sure I have it somewhere in my iCloud. Long diatribe about how 40 years ago he, met the Elroth, the entity, and that's why he, did whatever. And like he told him that he was going to be famous and be the leader of the vampires, the king of the vampires, but he can't call himself king. It's why he calls himself father. Like it's a whole thing. It's a whole spiel. But he's like, he told me that I was going to be in New York for this long, and I was going to go to Paris, and I was going to go to LA at this point in time when I'm this age, this year, and this, it was a whole thing. So like, I mean, that was 2016. So that's been almost 10 years. I can't remember the details exactly, but yeah. he's like, this prophecy came to me, and so for everything in it's come true.
Which is interesting because it's everything that he has control over. Like when
Right.
he moves somewhere, it's an easy prophecy to make happen. Okay. Thank you for speaking up, says Necro. That's awesome. Any other questions from our community here? This has been so great. Let's see. Crystal, thank you for sharing. It sounds like this is such an important story. Yes, definitely. Everyone go watch her episode if you have not already. Very strong woman to survive and keep going. I saw a few people have mentioned in the comments of your other video, as well as here, I've seen a couple about how people barely dodge the bullet, where they're like, oh man, I was almost involved in that community. I really wanted to go to the endless night balls and I didn't. I feel like I dodged a bullet. So it's interesting how many people have crossed paths. Actually, you were mentioning him saying, oh, I've had my fingers in her mouth story, which is kind of gross. Someone mentioned in the comments, oh my gosh, this guy's had his fingers in my mouth. I bought things from him.
No, and I've gotten a ton of messages like that, tons of comments like that on my TikTok videos about this, wherein people are like, "Oh, I was gonna go, but then I had a bad feeling, or I heard a bad story, or oh, I was gonna go, but I'm glad I didn't get to you," and then I've gotten, unfortunately, like probably 10 to 15 stories just of people going, "It felt super invasive when he made my fangs. He was very creepy about it. He was very touchy. It was very weird." Like just the fang part.
Yeah.
And then of course I've gotten much worse stories that are not mine to tell. And
Yeah.
I try to encourage anyone who feels, who might feel comfortable to speak out, but obviously it's, up to them, and those are their stories to tell. But
Of course.
there is way worse out there that he's done.
Right. If anyone listening does want to share their story, we're always open to hearing from you. You can email us at cultstoconsciousness@gmail.com. We've seen a few comments of people talking about their brushes with him, but yeah, like we've mentioned, it is a big deal to come forward and be public, especially with someone who is known to try and tear people down once they do speak out. So, do we have any final comments or questions, Jonathan, that you want to look at? How did you learn how to do makeup? Asked Grace.
Just practice. I'm very grateful to the early YouTubers who are makeup
Yes.
influencers. No, I learned. My mom took me to a Clinique counter when I was 13, and like had them show me how to do like your basic makeup stuff. I think it was like year 2000. I was 13, and I became really into makeup in high school and just kind of continued on with it. I eventually started working for a haunted house in Kansas City and kind of like self-taught myself effects makeup from YouTube in the early 2010s. And from there, I was like, hey, I'm actually pretty good at this. Let me go to Hollywood and do makeup. And then I did that. I went to makeup school in Hollywood. So I ended up out there. I was there to do makeup on films and stuff. Never got super big with it. Definitely met some really amazing, makeup artists and, got to do some really cool things. But, at this point, it's just fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. And if you guys aren't familiar with her story yet, makeup was a huge part of how he exploited her. Father Sebastian exploited her for her talents and her business, and another reason why she's speaking out. So definitely go watch that if you haven't already. Any other final comments from people? Let's see. Katruna, thank you for being here. You're the best. Break the silence, break the cycle. Yes, I feel like that's one of our unofficial taglines because you comment on every single one of our videos and we super appreciate that. It's so true. Just coming forward, shedding light on these things can hopefully help at least one person avoid a similar situation. So, absolutely. Any others before we sign off? Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about, Rachel, that we haven't brought up already?
Probably, but on the spot. And honestly, I mean, like I said, I made a very considered effort to come and speak out about this on my own channel, and then I very appreciate you giving me the platform to speak out about it through your channel and through your audience as well. But honestly, like a lot of times I very much try hard not to think about this stuff. I tried not to let it occupy too much of my brain Because while I was involved, it was occupying my mind all the time. Like I remember at the peak of everything when I was super, super involved with him and everything was really toxic and it was very, he called me 23 times in one day.
Yikes.
And it was that kind of like constant. And so I mean, at this point, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it. But I have, kept record of everything that happened. And really just my hope is that, as it has thankfully done, prevents people from getting too involved, because
Mm-hmm.
I know that there's been people who were like me before me and who have come after me who've, gotten involved, and he'll keep doing it until someone holds him accountable or until enough people know better to avoid him and
Mm-hmm.
his group. Because they
Yeah.
unfortunately enable it. I enabled it while I was involved. I didn't even realize I was doing it, but like I absolutely defended him before I knew the whole story.
Yeah. And that's the thing about narcissists is you really just have to steer clear because they are so good at sucking you in and making you believe otherwise. They're like, oh, don't listen to whoever because this, and this is my real story, and da 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 da. And I'm going to entrust you with it because I trust you. And they get
Yes.
close to you and they sink their claws in or their fangs in, and then you're done. So just avoid it instead of peeking yourself around the corner and trying to see what it's all about. It's better to avoid it completely.
Oh,
Thank you
one
so
more thing I
much.
wanted to touch on
Yes,
again was
yes.
that you mentioned how, positive the response has been from this, goth community and other subcultures. And I do agree with that. And like, I think I may have mentioned this in the previous video, I can't remember, but how unfortunately most subcultures, if not all of them, will attract, people who are outcasted, which is great, fantastic. We all want a place to belong. A lot of us feel othered by society. A lot of us are neurodivergent, a lot of us are marginalized in some other capacity as well. But because it does attract people like that, it's also going to attract predators. It just is.
Right.
It's going to attract people who are going to exploit that. And I've heard about this kind of thing in so many different subcultures, not just the vampire scene. And yes, most people have heard about it. And most people have heard about him specifically who are even like vaguely in the scene. Um, but they've never encountered it like closely, or they've heard whispers, but there's just so much. And it's so hard because especially in like LA, a lot of the clubs are run by predators. And eventually a lot of them get outed, like what happened to Cloak and Dagger. But a lot of them don't. And so,
Yeah.
it's supposed to be a safe space. It's supposed to be a community. And for a lot of people, it is. People are there for genuine reasons, and they're good people. And that's one reason why it's hard to leave, too. The reason why I
Mm-hmm.
didn't leave at first was I really didn't want to lose access to people I'd met that were not perpetuating it, who didn't really know what was going on, who were just, decent and like, not necessarily inner circle, but like just attending and hanging around and.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Really great people out there, and unfortunately, others who will exploit that because there are good people. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. Any other final thoughts before we wrap up?
Mm-mm.
Okay, where can everyone find you and support you?
My name on most platforms is Swampophile. I'm on TikTok. My Instagram is private because it's mostly just my kids. I do have a page on Facebook as well. And I've got a YouTube that I'm going to be uploading some of my TikTok stuff to. I just haven't gotten it done yet.
Awesome. Well, we'll put those links in the description. Guys, make sure you go check out her first interview. It's great. And leave those comments, especially if you're watching the replay. It does help boost the algorithm. Like, subscribe, all the YouTube things is the best way to support the podcast. We have a Patreon, patreon.com/cults to consciousness. We have some merch over at cultstoconsciousness.com. And if you want to go to Mexico with us, we are going at the end of October. Link is in the description. Thank you guys so much for being here live. We always appreciate when you tune in from wherever you are around the world. And until next time, follow your highest excitement, be conscious, and be well.